Ian Wright, thank you very much for joining me.
Very welcome. Good to see you.
It's great to meet you, and thanks very much for coming to the studio. Yeah, quick trip to New Zealand?
Yes, just a week.
Yeah, fantastic. And you're at TED yesterday, how'd that go?
That went really well. 1,200 people in the theatre, was full. It's a great event, it just really is. There were some very interesting speakers.
Fantastic. So to kick this interview off, what would you say is one of the most transformative business experiences that you ever think you've been through that taught you the most?
Well, there's been a few. I think probably the first real job I had was for a startup company in Auckland, Broadcast Engineering, and they were the people that built Radio Hauraki. And then after Hauraki got a license, they built the land station, and of course then there were going to be more licenses and more private stations, so they started a little company to build those. So I worked for them for a little while, and we built one, Radio Pacific actually.
Right, and yeah, just talk a little bit about the early days. I mean, I'm curious to know how you first got your interest in this whole, I guess, engineering and later electric vehicles. When did it all start?
I think you're born with it. I mean, I used to pull stuff apart when I was a little kid, and my parents didn't stop me, so I pulled apart various clocks and the TV and the radio, and they were vacuum tubes in those days, high voltage stuff. I didn't electrocute myself. I pulled apart engines. I made a go-kart out of an old lawnmower. So I think I was just always interested in how things worked, both mechanical and electrical.
And your background, I mean, is in engineering as well, from your jobs here in Auckland and in Australia with mostly data communications equipment. So I guess when you're in Australia, I read that you were building kind of some electric cars, just your own kind of...
No, I used to build race cars.
Race cars, right.
Yeah,
okay.
No electric cars.
No, that's right, because you were saying at that stage you didn't think electric cars.
No, I mean, I had looked at it, I had thought about it. I mean, I knew people that had built electric cars. Even when I lived in Auckland, there was someone I knew, someone I worked with that had built one. But, you know, it had like a 10-mile range and it would do 30 miles an hour. It wasn't really a car. So until the batteries got so much better with the lithium-ion batteries, it wasn't really a good option.
Yeah. And at what stage was it where you... It's fascinating that I guess back then that was kind of the opinion, and now with the company you co-founded, Tesla, just looking at what they've achieved. I mean, at what stage did you see the opportunity and go, wow?
Oh, well, that was still my opinion when we started Tesla, because Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpening had actually incorporated the company, and they're both neighbours of mine. And I bumped into Martin at a Halloween party, and he said, "Hey, I know you used to build race cars when you lived in Australia, and a friend and I were thinking about building, high-performance electric sports cars. What do you think?" And I said, "I think you're crazy. They're golf carts, aren't they?" And he said, "No, trust me, it's a great idea." And so what actually convinced me was he went and borrowed Al Caccioni's T0 prototype from AC Propulsion in Los Angeles and brought that up, and I drove that on Skyline Boulevard where I live, and that's an electric car that does 0 to 60 in 3.6 seconds. It's pretty quick. And I got out of that, a changed man. I said, wow, that was fun. So that was the tipping point for me to realize that the technology had actually gotten to the point where you could make something that was seriously fast and had seriously useful range.
Okay, and tell us a bit more about the early days of starting Tesla, because you were the VP of vehicle development. I mean, it must have been fascinating to start with nothing and work out how are you going to build something like this.
Yeah, well, so we intended to cheat, kind of. We knew from the beginning that we didn't want to build an entire car, and we all liked the Lotus Elise, and we knew that Lotus had Lotus Cars and Lotus Engineering, and that Lotus Engineering did contract engineering work for anyone that would pay them. And so we thought we might be able to persuade them to do a version of the Elise that we could use as our car. And that was a big part of my job, was to make that deal happen.
Right, okay. What were some of the greatest challenges that you faced in those early days of building Tesla?
Well, we really were astonishingly naive. We thought we could do the whole thing for $25 million, and in the end I think they wound up raising almost $1 billion to get to the point where they were shipping cars. We naively thought, because we'd done pretty complex networking projects, and I'd built a super scalable optical switch and ultra long haul transmission system, and that was, I spent $72 million doing that to 132 engineers on the project. That's a seriously complex piece of machinery. And we look at something like a Lotus Elise and go, wow, that's really simple. How hard can it be to make something like that? And as it turns out, it's actually quite hard.
Right. Yeah.
So there was a lot of things we didn't know.
Yeah, okay. And did you ever dream that the company would become what it has?
Well, again, we didn't really know. In this case, we knew we didn't know, so we couldn't really see that far ahead. We said we'll do this first car and we'll learn a lot and we'll see how that goes. One of the goals right from the beginning was to change the public perception of electric cars, because they don't have to be heavy, ugly, and slow. And I think Tesla's succeeded, actually well beyond what we dreamed of in the beginning at changing the public perception.
Okay. Right, yeah. And I guess you left the company 1 year after it was founded, and you've said before how one of the main reasons that was because I guess you had different visions. Everyone else's vision was really to make it cheaper and cheaper so everyone could have it, whereas you were kind of wanting to build the more high performance kind of electric car. So I guess today in 2015, do you still believe that it will be a huge challenge to build a low price sort of mass market car that's still sexy and cool that everyone wants to drive?
Yeah, because it's a different world now, and of course the big guys are building them, right? But I mean, I like to use the example of the Nissan Leaf, which is based on the Nissan Versa. And in the US you can buy a Versa for $16,000, and a Leaf, the same car that's electric, is $32,000. But you save about $800 a year in fuel, and it costs you $16,000 more to do that. So that's a 20-year payback. That's even worse if you do discounted cash flow on that. So, and I don't think a startup company's got any hope of building those cars as cheaply as Nissan or Toyota could. So yeah, I am still, in fact, of the same opinion.
Okay, and what do you think will be the greatest challenge? Do you think that will be the greatest challenge for Tesla over the next 5 years? Or?
I don't know what Tesla's going to do. I mean, they've done extraordinarily well making not cheap cars, but very nice cars. And we like to joke that the Model S is the Toyota Camry of Palo Alto. I mean, everybody has one. They're outselling Mercedes and BMW. So I'm not sure where they're going next. I haven't talked to them for a long time.
Okay, yeah, and I guess just from your personal opinion, obviously we saw that Apple announced that they're going to do their own electric car. Do you think that will pose a threat, or?
To whom? To Tesla?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure how much sense it makes for Apple to do a car, and if they're even really serious about it. I mean, I think they've got a good shot at sort of taking over the electronics space in cars, and maybe this is a sort of Trojan horse to do that. But I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it.
So just to talk a little bit about Wrightspeed now, it started in 2005. You originally built the X1, which for about 10 years was the fastest street legal car in the world, 0 to 60 miles per hour in 2.9 seconds. It's an amazing achievement. So before, and then obviously with Wrightspeed now moving into sort of service and delivery vehicles, which alone is sort of a $5 billion a year market in North America. So after leaving Tesla to start Wrightspeed, what were some of the biggest, I guess, lessons you took from that whole Tesla experience when you started Wrightspeed?
Well, it was mostly what not to do. So we do pretty much everything differently than Tesla does. It's a range extended EV powertrain, and well, I guess Tesla also learned that it's not a great idea to air cool the batteries. I don't know. I mean, we went off on quite different paths. I learned a lot from all the rejections from the venture capitalists, and Nancy Cammy at Intel Capital is the first one that said, you really shouldn't think about building vehicles because you can't add any value to that. The technology advances are in the powertrain, so figure out how to just build the powertrain and sell that. And the problem with that, of course, is if you're making those for cars and you're a startup company, you can't really go to Ford and say, here's this fantastic powertrain, would you like to use it? Because you're not even going to get the time of day from them. So if you think about it for trucks, though, you can A, make a much better economic case for it because trucks burn so much more fuel and you can save so much more fuel in the right drive cycles. And B, it's common in trucks that the truck manufacturer doesn't make the engine or the transmission, and they buy those from Cummins or Caterpillar or Allison and so on. So there's already a business model where you can be a powertrain supplier into the truck market, and that's not so much the case for cars.
Right, okay. And the focus on trucks as well, obviously they burn significantly more fuel than cars, so it makes a lot more sense as well. In the future, do you think Wrightspeed will ever make a truck itself, or will the focus always be on the powertrain?
No, I don't think we need to. I think there's plenty
Okay.
of people know how to make trucks.
Right, yeah. Do you see it as a risk that I guess a company might come and do like a whole electric truck, like almost like a company like Tesla, but maybe not Tesla, but another startup that's focusing just on building electric trucks, and that way, I guess everything's there from scratch as opposed to needing the one part?
Well, if you're suggesting that they design and build the entire powertrain and the entire truck, then that's a lot harder than what we did, because they've got to learn how to make the trucks as well as the powertrain, and I'm not sure why anyone else would do that either. So no, I don't actually worry about that.
Okay, right. And with 13,000, I believe 13,000 garbage trucks in California, they're burning, is it 14,000 gallons of fuel per year?
Each, yeah.
Yeah, wow, it's an incredible market. So how did you identify it in the first place?
I didn't actually. So we started just trying to do the delivery trucks, and so FedEx was the lead customer, and so we built a system for them and put some in their fleet, and they're happy. So we got to the point where we could talk about that, so we announced that. And then we started to get inquiries from other people that wanted us to help them, and one of those inquiries was from a company up in the North Bay that has 200 garbage trucks, and they called us up and said, hey, we read about you in the San Francisco Business Journal, and wondering if you can make this technology work for our garbage trucks. And we sort of looked at each other and said, well, they're like 4 times the weight of the delivery trucks. Can we even do that? And so we did a bit of engineering on that and decided that with a 4-speed gearbox and with 4 motors instead of 2 and 3 battery packs instead of 1, yeah, we could do that. And in fact, if you then, once you get to that point, you start calculating the fuel savings, you go, wow, I had no idea they burn so much fuel.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can't claim any credit for that. That was customer driven.
Right, okay. And is it important as a startup, do you think, to be kind of agile and listen and
Yes.
be able to pivot quite fast?
Yes. Anyone thinking of starting a company, I'd recommend you read Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1, and he's very big on that, and I agree with him. I think when you start a company, almost always, you really don't know how it's going to turn out. You really don't know what customers are really going to want. And you can't really engage them until you've got something to show them, something they can try. And there's no point in asking customers, what do you want? Or what do you need? Because they don't know. And the problem is they don't know what's possible. Okay. Right? It's much better to ask them, well, what problems do you have? Because they know that. And if you can if you can understand what their problems are and then convolve that with what you can do with the technology, then you can come up with them. But you still got to get them to test it. And still, you're going to get surprises.
Right. And as a startup as well, building technology like this, I can imagine it's incredibly complex. So you would need a lot of, I guess, awesome people to be able to build this sort of stuff. So what's your strategy been for finding the best talent, and where do you look?
Well, you always start with your own network, people you know and people they know, and that sort of spreads exponentially. But ultimately, you wind up paying recruiters. So we've had a full-time recruiter in-house for a long time.
Okay. Yeah, and how many, there's about 35 people now?
32, yeah.
32, and is it plans to scale it? I read up to about 300 over the next few years.
300 will probably be about 5 years away, but yes, we're growing as fast as we can, but we're still very fussy about who we hire.
Yeah. What type of person are you looking for?
If you mean what sort of jobs, I mean, there's...
more like the qualities of a person who you're looking to employ.
So, another good piece in Peter Thiel's book, I recommend you read it, is this power law idea. He sort of came at it by looking at venture capital companies and their portfolios, and sort of 90% of their returns are generated by 10% of the companies. The performance of the best ones is 10 times better than the average. And that's also true for engineers. That's also true for just about everybody in the company. The best ones perform not a little better, but 10 times better. So, we've built an incredible amount of intellectual property, mostly with 20 people. And those are all people that are performing sort of 10 times the norm. And if you can do that with the whole company, then, so that's the first thing. They've got to be really smart, really effective people. And we actually write down what our culture is, what sort of people fit in and what we expect. And the number one thing at the top of the list is getting stuff done.
Right, okay.
It's not showing up for work, it's not wearing the clothes, it's not the degree, it's not the intelligence, it's not how cool you are, it's actually getting stuff done. Nobody cares if you work 100 hours a week if you never get something done. Nobody cares if you work 30 hours a week if you get an enormous amount done. That's what matters. And the second thing on the list is it's always okay to say, I don't know. And it's never okay to make stuff up. You have to be honest, and if you don't know how to do something or you don't know the answer to something, you've got to say so. As soon as you start making stuff up, then it all goes pear-shaped.
Okay, right. And as a founder, I mean, what's your kind of techniques for motivating the employees that you work with to, I guess, be willing to turn up and just perform at their absolute best day after day after day?
There was a study done decades ago about that, which I still like. And the short answer is you can't motivate people to do that. The motivation comes from inside. There's a whole bunch of things you can do as the founder and the CEO or as a manager to demotivate people. If you abuse people, you can demotivate them fairly easily. So it's more a case of choosing people that are motivated. And so a big piece of that is making sure they understand what we're doing and why we're doing it and who we are and what it's like to work there. And then the people that get excited about that and want to be part of that, then they're already motivated. And then it's a case of setting them up so that they can succeed and get stuff done and not demotivating them.
Okay. Yeah. And I can imagine in Silicon Valley you must be surrounded by so many other different startups as well. So from seeing so many companies try to get off the ground, what do you see as the mistakes that entrepreneurs are making when trying to build successful companies?
Yeah, there's a TV show about that. I watched it on the plane on the way down here. It's actually pretty funny. I don't know. I think the mistakes are legion. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, but just because you think something is a cool idea doesn't mean people will pay for it. Just because you think something should be done doesn't mean people will pay for it. I don't know. I don't have good answers. There are just so many ways. There's one or two ways to get it right, and there's 1,000 ways to get it wrong. Right.
Okay. And let's just talk a little bit about raising capital, because that's something you've obviously led with Tesla in the early days and with Rightspeed as well. So, firstly, in the US market, when approaching investors, from your experience, what's the best way to get in the door initially?
Well, if you mean venture capitalists, there really is only one way, and that's you've got to be introduced. I mean, there's no point in sending them a business plan; they won't even bother to read it. So there's pretty much a country club. They invest in people that are known to the country club, and particularly people. If you've made money for venture capitalists before, any venture capitalist, then that's a huge start. If you haven't been part of a successful startup, then it's harder. But if you know someone who knows one of them and they can introduce you and vouch for you, then that's the way to start. You can schmooze. There's all kinds of events you can go to and meet them and chat to them and try and impress them. So I've done countless presentations at investor conferences and conferences of all sorts, and you generally wind up chatting to one or two people after that. So you learn to be fairly good at doing those kind of presentations. Perhaps the hardest of those I've done was an investor conference. I forget who organised it, but it was a 7-minute pitch. You have to do your entire business pitch in 7 minutes, and you can actually do that quite well if you put a bit of effort into it and practice it.
Okay. Yeah. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you said before it took about 5 years to raise the funding for Rightspeed.
It did, yes.
Yeah. So from your experience through that, I can imagine you pitched to like tens and tens or even hundreds of different VCs and individuals. So
certainly more than 100. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so from pitching to so many companies, what were they looking for? What were the key things that maybe you fell short and you've learned from that, but what were some of the key things that everyone's looking for that you've got to have prepared when you go into that door?
Well, it was a venture capitalist that said to me once that sheep are independent thinkers compared to VCs. So they tend to follow each other. So if social media is hot, then they're all looking for social media deals.
Right, okay.
And if you're not a social media deal, then they'll listen politely, but they're not really paying attention. So you have to grab their attention somehow. If it's something unusual, if it's not something that the other VCs are doing, not something they've seen succeed, if it really is something unusual, then you've got to figure out some way of actually getting them to understand it. And that's far harder than you might imagine.
Right. Is a prototype helpful?
Yes. I mean, yes. a prototype is helpful, but that's just a prototype, right? That doesn't tell them really anything about the business model. It doesn't tell them anything really about what the competitive landscape is going to look like. And there's some obvious things like, you know, I set out after leaving Tesla planning to build ultra-high performance electric cars and sell them for, you know, decent margins. But the problem with that is that the market's not very big. If you look at the elasticity of that market, you know, $1 million cars sell about 50 a year worldwide. You get down to $250,000 cars, it's like 1,000. Right? And you get down to $100,000 like a Porsche, now you're talking about, well, they sell 10,000 a year 911s in North America. So it's hugely like that. But if you can't build the thing for less than $100,000, then, you know. So the sort of short answer on that is, let's back up a little bit. The venture capital model is kind of broken. They make pretty poor decisions actually. For every 10 investments they make, you know, maybe one will be a home run, and 3 or 4 will do okay, and the rest they will actually lose all their money on. So all the money will be gone.
80-20 again, right?
Yeah, or even worse. It's the power law, yes. So what that means is they have to look at each one of those and do the numbers such that if it does succeed, they'll get 10 times their money back. And that has to be, and that's only true if they can do that within just a few years. If it's going to be 10 years to get a return, then they need a lot more than 10x. So they've got to look at it and say, all right, well, how much money is this company going to need to raise to get to an IPO? And when it does get to an IPO, what are the multipliers going to look like? So then you've got to have some sort of idea about how the stock market works. So to do an IPO, you've got to be at about 100 million revenue with a strong growth rate. And then what the investors need to see and what the market needs to see is that you've got a lot of headroom to grow so that you can maintain this growth rate for a long time before you bump into, well, the market's not big enough, we can't grow anymore because we already own the market. Yeah. So you can think of the sort of current valuation as being a discounted cash flow of the future. Right, so whatever cash the business is going to generate in the future, discount that back to now, and that's the valuation. So if you're in a market that, if you completely owned the market and saturated it was $100 million revenue, they're not even going to be interested. Okay, because they cannot get a 10x return on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. No, it makes a lot of sense. And I guess in New Zealand, one thing that people can be quite critical about is if in the past you've had a failed business. Is it the same in the States when you're pitching?
No, it's a learning experience.
Okay.
I mean, it depends a bit how many you've had and for what reason, and you know, how personally culpable you were for the failure. But no, I think it is, in that environment, it very much is, you know, okay, so you won't make that mistake again.
Yeah. Okay. And with when pitching to like government organisations and so on for funding, what are some of the main lessons you've learnt with differences there of trying to get money from public versus private?
There's a lot of lobbying. If you're talking federal government, then you really can't do it as a startup. Okay. You need lobbyists. I mean, and it may be if you're funded by one of the big VCs that they've got all the right connections and they can help you. But a lot of those things are not decided just on merit. So it's quite complex, and for people like me, it's very hard to understand, and you know, don't have the right skill set for that. So you'd have to find lobbyists and pay them, and if you can't afford to pay them, then don't bother.
Yeah. Okay, great. And just finally on raising capital, with Rightspeed, are you going to look to do an IPO, do you think, or? Sure. Yeah. Okay. Do you have any idea when? Are you prepared to talk about that?
When we get to 100 million in revenue.
Okay.
So assuming the market's in good shape then.
Yeah.
So 2 or 3 years.
Okay. So just before we head into our rapid bursts round to finish off, I just want to talk briefly about, I guess, your experiences working with Elon Musk and pitching in the early days for Tesla and so on. So you pitched to Elon right back with Tesla in the early days, about 2.5 hours of pitching at SpaceX. So I guess tell me more about the initial pitch and how it came about and how you approached Elon and all of that. Well,
we had just started pitching to VCs, and of course they all laughed at us. And they would have. I mean, there's no way that the VCs would have funded Tesla. They just wouldn't have, none of them. We know that now. We got introduced to Elon through AC Propulsion because essentially Tesla was executing Al Caccione's business plan. And Elon knew them, and he had been thinking about funding them to go and build electric sports cars. But they all jointly decided that that was actually beyond their reach and they couldn't do it. So at that point, they introduced us to Elon and said, Elon, you should go talk to these guys. So Martin and I flew down to LA to SpaceX, and we had put a slide deck together, and I walked him through the slides. And he asked a whole bunch of questions, which turned out to be pretty good questions, because he was not convinced that this could be done for $25 million. And in particular, the latest engineering piece of it and how long that would take and what that would cost. And so he was right, of course. I don't remember too many of the other questions. I know that he was pretty well informed, and he had been thinking about, well, he said, if I wasn't doing SpaceX, I'd be doing this myself. Right, so he wanted this to happen. So in that sense, it was an easy sale.
Yeah, yeah. And once he was on board, what was he like to work with?
Oh, he's great. He's super, super smart. He's a great engineer. He is gentlemanly and softly spoken. So he's nice to deal with. I mean, Kiwis would like him because he has this sort of Kiwi demeanor about him.
Okay, and pretty hands-on as an investor with those early days in Tesla?
He probably is kicking himself that he wasn't more hands-on, because things went a bit pear-shaped a couple of years later. He always was pretty involved. I mean, I'd get an email from him at 10 o'clock at night saying, hey, we're using this particular aluminium alloy in the spacecraft. What do you think about using that for the chassis? And I do a bit of searching on, and I say, yeah, well, we could do that. We'd save £5, but it would cost $5,000 more. So they go, yeah, not so much, don't worry.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, fantastic. And I guess from having worked with him with those early days in Tesla, what would be some of the greatest lessons you would say you've learnt from his way of going about business and everything he's taught you?
He's not even slightly afraid of trying things that haven't been done before and trying things that people say you can't do that. And most of the time, he's turned out to be right. I mean, when he started SpaceX, he originally thought, building rockets is hard. Most of them blow up. It took a long time to get reliable rockets in the US to get to the Saturn V. So I'll go and find the people that have built those rockets, and I'll employ them, and we'll figure out how to do it. And fairly quickly, he discovered that wasn't going to work. So he said, okay, heck with that. So I'll just hire some really, really smart engineers that haven't built rockets before, and we'll figure it out from scratch. And they did, and they've been very successful with it. And I think that's very inspiring to me. You've got to have good judgment, and you've got to try to do the right, the thing you're trying to do has to be useful. But this whole idea that just because everyone else thinks you're crazy, just because it's never been done before, that's not a good reason not to do it.
Yeah, okay. And with Wrightspeed, have you, I guess, discussed it with him or considered pitching to him? Or?
Oh, yeah. He's kind of completely, he's running SpaceX and Tesla.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, and he's got 5 little boys.
So we're just heading to our rapid burst questions to finish off. I guess, firstly, if you were looking to invest in a startup today, in a few words, what would be the key things you'd be looking for?
Well, okay, I tend to get excited when I see someone has an idea that, it seems to me there's a clear need for. And it's when they explain it to you, you go, well, yeah, obviously a lot of people need that, and why hasn't it been done? And then if you see that, yeah, these guys could do that, and they could do it well, and they could do it fast, then that looks exciting to me.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And what do you think is the most undervalued quality of an entrepreneur?
Undervalued. I don't know. Persistence, maybe.
Persistence. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what do you reckon the 16-year-old Ian Wright would think of who you've become today?
16. I don't think he would be too surprised. You could see the sort of convergent lines. I mean, what I'm doing now brings together a lot of the things I've always been interested in. I think I'm very lucky to be able to do this, where I can combine all this electronics and controls and mechanical, and you can drive the thing when you're done. It goes pretty well.
That's pretty cool, yeah.
And working with a team of really smart people, I mean, it's all just super cool.
Okay, any advice you would give him looking back?
Yeah, I think it's good advice for a lot of people. I didn't actually try doing it on my own until I was really sure I had a business plan that would scale. I think it would have been smarter, with the benefit of hindsight, to try a few things much earlier in my life and have them fail, and not to be so nervous about it. I mean, I was sort of following a path of, I was in startups and I was working with people who had started companies, but I hadn't done it myself, and it's not the same thing. And there's a lot of lessons that you can only learn by doing it.
Right.
So do it earlier.
Yeah, okay. And just coming back to Peter Thiel, I have actually read 0 to 1, so I'm keen to know what fundamental truth do you believe to be true that not many people agree with you on?
Well, there's so many of them. The use of turbines in trucks and cars is one. Trucks instead of cars is another one. I think, there's more subtle things, like, I don't know why it is, but almost everybody, as soon as you say electric drive, they think, oh, there's going to be all these compromises. Right? It's not going to have the range, it's not going to have the gradability, it's not going to have the speed, so there'll be some compromise. Right? And it doesn't need to be at all. It really doesn't. You can match everything the diesel will do, and you can do better than that in a lot of respects.
Okay. Fantastic. And just before we finish off, I guess, what quality of mind or state of mind do you think's best served you when you were success? So, for example, a guy who we interviewed called Peter Cooper said patience, and someone else said resilience. So what do you think that state of mind would be?
Persistence.
Persistence?
My wife would call it sheer bloody mindedness. The not giving up, and they say, everyone says, it's an emotional roller coaster, and it really is. And on a good day you feel really euphoric. Something comes together and it works, and you get funded, you get the right people. Well, there's all these things that are really, really exciting, and then there's other days when it just looks impossible and something bad has gone wrong, and you go, oh my God, what are we going to do now? And you have to not give up. And you realise that actually gets easier, because once you've had a few of the disasters, then you realise that, well, you didn't die, and you actually did figure out a solution to that. And sometimes the solution's actually better than if this disaster hadn't happened. You're in a better spot than if it hadn't happened. And so with enough of that history, then you realise that, persistence is. Yeah.
And is there something you've learned along the way, maybe not necessarily about business, but about life, that you've kind of, when you look back now, you kind of reflect on, and it's something you keep at the forefront of how you operate now?
I think that Powerlaw thing it took a long time for me to really accept that really is true. I mean, I've sort of known it for years, but it really is true. The best people perform at 10 times the productivity, 10 times the results of the average people.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. So, to finish off, I guess it's an amazing story, and it's an honour to interview you today, so thanks so much for coming into the studio. So can you please look down this camera here and tell us, what is your $1 million advice for the world of business, entrepreneurship and making things happen?
I think it would be retain your flexibility. You're going to get surprised. You're going to learn things from customers and from trying things that is not what you expected, and you've got to be flexible enough to roll with the punches, to change the business model, to change the technology, to take advantage of what you learn.
Great. And right, thank you so much.
Very welcome.
Cheers.
Thank you.